Charlie, do you have a message for your fans? Do you have a message for them? Do you want to say anything? What up, YouTube? You know what time it is. Today we're going to do things a little bit different. In this hand that I'm going to describe, instead of starting out with what I have, we're going to kind of take it from a different perspective and see what another player had against me and try to figure out what you would have done if you were in his shoes. So this aforementioned player is the straddle, limps around. Maybe there's like 3 or 4 limpers to him in the straddle. He picks up aces in the straddle. He makes it 80, which I think is a good raise. You don't want to be raising too small. 80 is maybe a little bit on the large size. I think you can maybe go to like 60, 65. But I think, out of position here in a spot where people are going to be calling wide and playing hands, I don't mind raising it up to 80. Now the button calls. The button is a player. He's an action player, likes to gamble, have a good time, likes playing big pots. He calls. I'm in the big blinds with my mystery hand, and I call 80 as well. So these are both players that I want to be playing pots against. One of them, the straddler, is a guy who I think has gotten a lot better. He's not making as many loose calls as he used to. Anyway, so I call the 80, and we go 3 ways to a flop, which comes Jack 8-4 with 2 diamonds. I check. The straddler bets 120 into 240, about half pot. I think this sizing could be a little bit larger because of the flush draw on the flop. I actually don't know if he had the ace of diamonds or not. I think obviously this plays a big part of it. If he does have the ace of diamonds, then I think we can probably size down because I'd be less concerned about getting value from nut flush draws. I think his bet sizing is fine in this situation. The button folds, and now I call. I think if I'm him, I expect me to be calling fairly wide here for this sizing. The turn is a jack pairing top pair, and now I decide to lead for 275 into him. With aces here, I think you have a pretty clear call. I don't think I have that many jacks in my range here, calling 80 pre-flop. And similarly, I think it's obviously a very good card for me to now bluff on. So he calls with aces, and now the river is an offsuit deuce. The flushes and the straight draws miss, and I bet 690 into him, which I think is about 70% pot. And he goes into the tank. So my question is to you guys is, do you think you're calling here with aces? Do you think it's a pretty mandatory call? What do you think my most likely hands are in this spot when I'm calling 80 pre-flop out of the big blind, check calling this flop, and then betting turn and river? At the time of this hand, actually one interesting kind of caveat to everything is pre-flop, when he made it 80 and I had called, just as I was calling, he looked back at his hand and I thought I had seen like a picture card. So I told him, hey man, you need to be careful. I think I might have seen a card. And he goes, oh, what'd you think you saw? And I said, oh, I thought I saw paint, which is what I thought I saw like a king or a queen or something like that. Obviously, he ended up having aces. I did see once I had bet the river and he was tanking again. He went back to look at his cards a couple times. And at this point, he obviously wasn't raising, so he made it pretty clear that he wasn't afraid of showing me. So I saw that he had aces. His immediate reaction on the river was, you know what, this is generally pretty much a snap call. And when he said that to me, I thought, man, he might have like ace jack here, or a jack rather. Obviously if it's ace jack, then I don't see how I could even think of ever folding. Later on, when I told him something about how, if you had ace jack, he was like, oh, I might have folded that too. Which I'm like, what are you talking about? How can you fold ace jack? So he's in the tank. He says kind of immediately afterwards, this is generally a snap call. Then he looks like he's about to fold for a while. He's just like, oh my God, like I really feel like I have the best hand here. He thinks again. He's just like, it's a good bet. Then he kind of like looks like he's gonna fold, pulls his cards back to himself. He is playing about, I think, 900. So it's almost like an all-in for him. He tanks some more, and he ends up mucking. Unfortunately for me, as I did have pocket eights, I flopped second set. From my perspective, I think a lead here on the turn is pretty mandatory because I did in fact think that his range here is like queens plus, queens, kings, aces. If he has a jack, fantastic. If he has ace king, I don't expect him to bet here anyway. So I'm basically targeting his overpairs here, hoping to have them never fold. On the river, I like my sizing. This is the sizing I would be taking with my bluffs. If, for example, I have a hand like 9-10, 9-10 of diamonds, Queen 10 of diamonds, Queen 9 of diamonds, things of that nature. This is exactly the line I would be taking because I think the turn is going to go check, check very often. Obviously, I could just check the turn and hope to realize equity because he's going to check back very often. But there's a lot of times in this situation where I'm going to try kind of this aggressive approach where if I don't end up hitting, I could bet multiple streets and, and put him in a tough spot with his one pair type holdings. Pretty unfortunate that he finds a fold here because I think there's a lot of players in this casino who are going to call. It's really frustrating that he makes a good fold. From his perspective, I don't think I have a jack here very often. Maybe every once in a while, like Queen Jack or Jack 10 suited pre-flop, but I don't think I'm calling 80 here pre-flop with those types of hands. I guess it's close for him. He made a great fold. I mean, there's not much more I can say. He told me afterwards that he's like pretty much snap calling a $400 and something bet, like 400. He said he's got to call just because the bet's small. And I told him, I'm like, if I was bluffing, I'm never betting 400. And he's like, yeah, I know, but it's like a lot easier to call 400. So it's very frustrating that I'm beginning to feel like I have to have this like super exploitative approach. Obviously, lately I've been bluffing a lot of times big, so I feel like if I'm gonna be value betting here, I should be going for a large number. The pot is like $1,000, so a 690 here isn't really that big of a bet. Obviously, from his perspective, he does just have one pair, and he doesn't think I'm going to be bluffing very often. So, kudos to him. He made a great fold. After this hand, I played just two more interesting ones. In one of them, I limp after maybe one or two limpers on the button with 6-7 suited. The big blind makes it 40, folds to me. I call, small blind calls. We go three ways to a flop, which is ace, queen, jack, rainbow. He checks. I think his hands here are often going to be hands like ace king, ace queen, kings, ace queens, aces, and jacks. So basically the only hand that I want him to have here is king, so there's like no point in me betting. I think this flop hits him very often when he's making a 40 pre-flop. I check. We end up going to the turn, which is the 8 of diamonds. Now I pick up a flush draw. He bets 60. I call, and the small blind folds. At this point, obviously hoping to hit a diamond because I think that he's very likely to have a big hand. The river, unfortunately, is a king. Now he checks. I decide to bet 160 as a bluff. I think his most likely hands here are like ace king plus. And as a result, I think this is a really stupid bluff. It's just really dumb because I don't expect ace king plus to be folding here. They're just going to side call always, especially for $160. It's really silly for me. This is a very ambitious bluff, especially in this field. He ends up calling pretty quickly and has aces for flop top set. Obviously, when I'm betting this river, I'm never betting this river with a hand like queen, jack, king, queen, things with showdown value. I'm not sure if he knows that. Maybe he thinks that I'm turning some two pairs into bluffs. I'm just never doing that. I'm going to just hope that it somehow wins because I don't expect him to be folding the hands that beat me. I'm not getting value from worse. Obviously, in this case, I have to bluff because I don't have a winner. Nonetheless, I don't like bluffing. I think it's a really bad spot to be doing it. So, case in point, if I'm going to be bluffing, it's got to be in larger pots in places where I think I can get through, and this obviously isn't one of them. Which brings us to our last hand. I'm in the big blind with 6-8 of diamonds. We have an under-the-gun razor to 20. The button calls, and now I call out of the big blind. This is probably too loose. I think this is a better spot to just be folding pre-flop. As I've mentioned before, these hands just play way better in position. I don't need to be playing it out of position. A lot of times you're going to flop or draw out of position, and now, what are you going to do? You're either going to have to be aggressive post-flop out of position or check calling to hit a draw that you're not even sure oftentimes will be good. So I call, and we go three ways to a flop, which is 10-5 deuce with 2 diamonds. I check. The pre-flop better bet 60 into like 60. The button calls. This is a spot where I just don't want to fold. A lot of times I do fold, actually. Even though I make this loose call pre-flop, a lot of times I'll just fold here because I'm not even sure if I hit a diamond if I'll be good. At the same time, a lot of times I'll make this fold, and this has happened to me numerous times where I fold, I hit a flush, and I ended up having like the only live flush draw, and I end up being very frustrated with myself. So I end up making a call here, which I think is kind of negative EV. Obviously if I'm playing this hand out of position and I'm folding this flop, like what the hell am I calling for pre-flop? So I call. We go 3 ways to a turn, which is the ace of hearts. I check. The pre-flop opener tanks and checks, and now the button checks as well. At this point, I think it's quite likely maybe the pre-flop opener has a pocket pair like jacks, queens, kings, or possibly a flush draw himself like king, queen of diamonds, queen, jack of diamonds, something of that nature. And maybe the button has like a 10, or maybe the button himself has the flush draw. River is an offsuit 8, so I make a pair of 8s. Obviously, I don't expect to win here very often, so I decided to turn my hand into a bluff in what looks like cap range. I bet $215. I think this, again, is a bad spot because I just think one of these guys is going to end up heroing me in a spot where, like, if either of them has a 10, I just don't expect them to necessarily fold. The only reason I like this spot for bluffing is because I think the under the gun player is a bit capped with a player to act behind him. And for the sizing, like, he doesn't want to call like 215 and then have the player behind him like snap call with like ace 4 of diamonds or something of that nature. Anyway, he ends up folding, and now the button, he tanks and ends up calling with jack 10 for a pair of 10s. Again, I think this is actually a fairly standard call for him. With the under the gun player folding, it looks a lot like that guy might have had a pocket pair, and I'm just going to have very often here a flush draw when I'm overcalling out of the blinds. The only real hand he's afraid of, I think, is like ace x of diamonds. So I think this is a pretty standard call for him. And again, just a really bad spot for me to be bluffing. And this final hand, which kind of ended up bringing me to maximum tilt, is just a hand where I ISO king queen and end up getting basically all in on a queen high flop against a short stack who also has king queen. After the hand, I end up looking at my stack, and I'm almost positive that the pot wasn't chopped correctly because we ended up chopping about $90, and I had basically exactly what I started the hand with. And when I looked over at him, it looked like he was up about $100, which would have been like the chop pot. I'm not 100% sure of it. I didn't notice it till like a hand or two later. I brought it up. The dealer was like, well, you saw me chop it correctly. Like, I'm like certain I did it right. I mean, again, like, you know, it's only like 40-50 bucks. Still is a bit frustrating. For those interested in the numbers, I ended up winning $225 today. We're going to call that upstuck. I was up about like maybe $700 or $800 before the bluffs and kind of before not making any hands. Obviously, if I get called by the aces, I end up being up like $1,400. So just the whole session feels like a loss despite winning, given that, you know, I didn't get paid off in the big hand and had those other bluffs ripped off. Today was a pretty frustrating session, I've got to be honest. I put up, again, just a couple of bad bluffs in spots where I think the key takeaway for me here is to not be bluffing in spots where it's like $100 to $200 bluffs, because people are just going to call way too often. I need to be, even if I feel like someone has a cap range, you know, they're aware of this, they're aware of like what I'm doing, and so I'm going to be getting heroed a lot more often. Obviously, I think going forward, I need to just be kind of value betting hands. It's rather unfortunate this 8's full hand. I think either A isn't against a different opponent, or that the turn isn't a jack. Because obviously if the turn isn't a jack, I think this pot ends up playing way bigger. And I'm not sure if he ends up folding aces. It's rather unfortunate that the one guy that I'm not bluffing in a week who has aces decides to find a fold. Anyway, that's all for now. Picking up Charlie. Again, thanks guys for all the support. I really appreciate all the comments. I enjoy the hand analysis. I no longer need to be told to stop bluffing. I'm aware that I need to kind of cut off the bluffs. So we could probably not mention that in the comment section. If you have something else you'd like to say, I'd love to hear that. But I am well aware that I need to cut back the bluffing. Anyway, thanks guys, and catch you in tomorrow's episode.